a little Congresswoman.
Hi.
I've lived abroad in South Korea, Taiwan, Netherlands, and after living there, I realized it's so much safer there because there's strict gun laws. I moved to Seattle in October, and I'm honestly terrified if I'm going to get shot. Just today, someone in Columbus was killed by a gun, one was shot in Pioneer Square, and the progressives still haven't put forth any substantive stances, because realistically, Australia solved theirs by gun buyback programs, so did the UK, and no one, not even progressives are talking about that. I might sound radical here, but after living abroad in those countries, I feel so much safer because I didn't worry about when I taught at school if I was going to get shot, or if I was going to a bookstore if I was going to get shot. And no one here wants to even start the conversation. They act like banning AR-15 will fix their background check, but realistically it just won't. Do you think there's ever a chance for us, the progressive movement, ever taking substantive gun control stances, just because realistically nothing's going to change these small,
Yes, I mean, I really hope so. I have a gun buyback bill. I also have a bill that I'm about to introduce with a Republican around voluntarily turning back your guns if you are struggling with mental health issues. And so, we're trying to get guns off the streets. I mean, if you look at, I was just looking at a study, and CM actually worked for the Giffords organization before coming to me, so she knows this issue really well as well. But I was just looking at a study of how many guns are in other countries, particularly developed countries, but actually all countries. It is remarkable how crazy it is in the United States in terms of guns on the street. So I do think that there's a hope, but again, we need bigger majorities, we need to get rid of the filibuster, and we need to pass sensible gun reform legislation that is actually going to make a difference in the way that you're talking about. So we are pushing it. We have passed a number of pieces of legislation, but you're right, it's the things that are easier for everybody to embrace. It would be a big start. I don't think it wouldn't do anything. I think they would do a lot of things. And then of course the states are passing some really important laws, just like we did in Washington State with limiting ammunition rounds, that the law that just passed and the governor just signed. So we'll keep the faith. We're going to keep pushing on it. It's so important to us. Thank you.
Hi, Representative Jayapal, I think you're awesome. I'm a racial and injustice and health and justice advocate, and all the work you're doing is all about health justice. And I envision that a great America would be sort of like Finland without racism. And I thought someone said earlier, it's not really capitalism, it's racial capitalism, which is different, and it's taken in our history. But I have a different question, and I'm out of my sorts here because it's about Ukraine and international politics, which is I have a question about China. It's the elephant in the room, and we don't seem to be talking about them. And we are putting up our chests and talk about NATO and the strength of NATO, and we're not and we know China doesn't agree with us on this, and they're huge. So what are we doing for policy? Because I do think we can, okay, I heard my buzzer. I do think we actually can stop killing if China can step up and we can show some diplomacy with them.
Yeah, no, really, really important. And I think that, so you've probably seen the president had a 2-hour meeting with President Xi, and I think we are trying to show China that if they do continue to support, I mean, so far they've sort of stayed neutral, but they haven't cut anything off with Russia. India's in the same position, by the way. These are two enormous markets that we need to bring on board with our strategy if it's going to be successful. And so that work is ongoing. I think that there are real, I think China is afraid to move and alienate the United States even more. But look, this is all going to take, it's going to take a lot of pressure. And China is watching also because of Taiwan. So, there are real issues at stake for China here. And I think we're just going to have to continue to try to build whatever we can build and use some threats along with threats of alienation, which China does not want. Along with along with any carrots we might have. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, Congressman.
Hi.
So I'm also for de-escalation. However, when I look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., it seems to be going in the opposite direction, and it frightens me. And if things keep going where they're going, where it's escalating, you know, where we're sending weapons and things like that, I think we're going to have nuclear war. That's where this thing is going. And one of the things I think that's missing is a statesman-like quality from our leaders. Like there isn't like a Kennedy or anybody like that, or an FDR, or a calming voice. Everyone wants to one-up the other guy and how they talk about the situation. You know, you have some people calling for no-fly zones, or you know, it affects the people too. Even in this room, people are talking about sending MiGs and stuff like that. I don't think people really have thought through what this actually means. So how do we actually ratchet it down, and how do we generate statesman-like quality? And are any of your colleagues consulting with people like Jack Matlock or even a John Mearsheimer, these guys were slandered as Russian apologists, when if you look at some of the statements they were making, they were on the mark. We could have avoided the situation if we actually showed Russia some respect. So are any of you talking to these people?
Well, so, you know, I think that we have been, if you look at the statements that I've made on behalf of the Progressive Caucus, we have been really pushing back and de-escalating as much as we can, and actually the president has been also. It was Congress who insisted on passing more legislation to escalate, not actually the president. Now, some of that legislation, you know, has pushed in a direction that perhaps, I think let me put it this way, the most important thing for de-escalation is to give the White House flexibility, to give the diplomats and the negotiators flexibility for off-ramps. The more Congress legislates a fixed outcome, whether it's with sanctions, whether it's with the oil ban, whatever it is, the harder it is to give Putin an off-ramp. So what we've done, even in the legislation we've passed, because you're right, the push was to warmonger, is to try to build in as much flexibility for the White House and for the negotiators to be able to do their job. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that, but in an environment where, you know, a lot of, I mean, even people in this room, you know, a lot of people I know are watching this thing unfold on television, and it's heartbreaking, right? It's heartbreaking. People want to do something. They want us to stop it. And that's why I started by saying there aren't any good choices on the table right now. We are trying to de-escalate as much as we possibly can, but we also, you've heard the differing opinions in this room. I would say that they are present in Congress as well. There are people who want us to do more with weapons to stop Putin right now, who feel like Putin doesn't respond to anything other than force. And there are other people that are saying, no, we can't do that. My own personal view is Putin would like nothing more than for us to go to war and to start to quote, start the aggression. That's how he's going to classify it. He's looking for an opportunity to be able to be rationally coming into escalating this to a nuclear war. We can't do that. That's why I'm saying we got to de-escalate, but we also have to give Ukraine the tools so that they can continue to keep Putin at bay. And then the whole time, we need to be working on diplomacy. And yes, we are talking to a number of people, and the Progressive Caucus has actually pulled our members together with off-the-record conversations with people from all different sort of viewpoints, so that we can get the best intelligence we can get and the best advice we can get. But there are no good solutions. There really are no good solutions. And I share your concern about escalation. I do. Thank you.
Hello, I would like to ask if there are a possibility that we could create housing under the elevated highways and freeways that we have, because the cost of acquisition of land is the most expensive thing when it comes to building houses. After World War II, the returning GIs needed housing. We built Montlake Terrace out of cinder block homes in Levittown, Pennsylvania. Can we also build those cinder block homes underneath our elevated freeways and highways? Especially I see them in the south of Seattle, where there's lots of vacant land, close to industrial area. I would like you to explore that possibility. And with regard to elections, I think we need to change it so that there are no political parties. If you want to run for office, he wants to run for office, I want to run for office, we have certain criteria that we have to meet. We have to get so many signatures, raise so many, not money, but go to meetings or do whatever criteria we set out. Then we go to the government office. The government gives you the same amount of money and everybody else who's running the same amount of money. Whoever wins, wins. Because right now we have the Hatfields and the McCoys year after year, vote after vote, and nothing is happening. So we need to change our electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. On housing, look, the federal government we don't control where housing is built. That's done at the local level, state level. But our job is to provide dollars, essentially, resources, and then some guidelines around it. And we have underinvested over and over again in the Housing Trust Fund. And so the amount of money that we put into housing is pretty negligible. And that is both for repairs of existing public housing and for construction of new housing, as well as for the vouchers that help people to get affordable housing. All of those three aspects are deeply underinvested. It's why we were trying to get $150 billion for housing into Build Back Better, and we're going to continue to fight for that. So that's really been my focus, is trying to make sure we get those dollars to invest, and then also using my office as a place to collect people who care about housing to talk about ideas around how the federal government can be more helpful. But when I was in the state senate working with Frank Chop, actually, we were able to get a lot of those transit sites that weren't being used in South Seattle. I actually represented the 37th district, which is South Seattle. We were able to get a lot of those transferred to the city for affordable housing. And so that is already happening, and I know that that's been happening, and the idea there is to build transit-oriented development. So it is close to transit, it's easy to access, and it's affordable. So I know a lot of that is happening, but it's not enough, you know. And even with the housing vouchers that we released through the American Rescue Plan, a bunch of them didn't get used in Seattle because we just don't have enough units that are willing to take those, because we have a lot of people who earn $150,000, $200,000 in Seattle who can afford a very expensive apartment, and so it has really pushed rents up dramatically. And there are a lot of apartments now that are owned by venture capitalists and private equity firms, and they aren't interested in bringing their prices down. So, you know, it is a real problem, and we're trying to figure out what we can do, and working with just had a meeting with the King County Regional Authority on Homelessness, trying to figure out how we can be helpful. So we'll continue to work on that.
Hi, I have two questions that maybe you could address briefly. The first, I want to second the good fortune that I feel for having you and Senator Murray and Senator Campbell. And how do you think that we in this fortunate location can encourage others in other parts of the country to vote for Democratic? I mean, we're constantly being asked for money.
Yeah.
I write postcards. What do you think is most effective as an elected official?
Yeah, so two things on that. One is, this is an official side town hall, so I can't talk about what I do on the unofficial side, but if you sign up for my campaign newsletters, you'll see we're gonna have a whole program going to help people around the country with our volunteers here, assuming that you're going to re-elect me. I hope you re-elect me. It would be really nice. But we are going to put our volunteers to work around the country. So I hope you ask, I hope you go on our website, on our campaign side, and look at that information. But the other is, I say to people, make a list of 20 people in states that have Republican senators or their colleagues. They're probably people you don't want to get into a fight with. That's why you haven't talked to them about this. I would say have a little courage to raise these questions. The questions of democracy, the questions of core values. and trust your family members and your loved ones, that they will at least listen to you. You know, trust your friends from college that you haven't talked to in 20 years, that they will be excited to hear from you, even if it's to talk to them about why they need to make sure to vote for the Democratic candidate. But I really think that's an important thing, is just to use your network, your own network, in places other than this district. Okay, they're telling me 2 more questions, so.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and for all the work that you and your staff do. I'm really excited about your climate resilience legislation. And I remember last year, and I think maybe in 2020, AOC, as well as a representative from Colorado, introduced Climate Corps.
Yeah.
So with that, I got a three-part question. Can you help me understand why new legislation needs to be introduced? Why your Workforce Act is different? And third, how Indigenous communities and all ways of knowing are being included?
Yes, thank you. So the last one first, that is at the center of how we develop our legislation. It's also at the center of how resources are distributed. That's what Justice 40 is about, is making sure that 40% of all investments go into communities that are most disproportionately burdened. So that's kind of at the center of how everything's created. In terms of the Civilian Climate Corps, that is actually an idea that's in Build Back Better. So we were able to get a significant amount of money put towards Civilian Climate Corps, which if we pass the climate provisions of Build Back Better, which I still think we have a shot of doing, then that will create a huge amount of opportunities for young people in particular to be able to come in and work in this Civilian Climate Corps. So I think that's what you're talking about with Alexandria's legislation. And the climate resilience bill is different than that, but it incorporates pieces of that. So we're also looking at the climate resilience group that's within FEMA. There's a number of other places where there are sort of Earth Corps type entities, but not big enough. So if we're able to do the Civilian Climate Corps, it would be significantly more. But they don't do resilience planning, they don't do workforce development. The things that are in the climate resilience bill are much, much more than when I say only, I don't mean to minimize it, but it's more aspects than only the Climate Corps. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hair-raising to be the last person here, because I have a kind of a difficult thing to say. The saddest moment of my political life was listening to a young woman who had been passionately canvassing and organizing for Hillary Clinton in the Midwest. And she kept calling back to the headquarters and saying, the messaging is not working, nothing's working, calling people deplorables is losing millions of votes. I read 10 to 15 different news sources a day. I'm a news junkie, come from a journalist family. And my sources are good. We're losing people to the Republican Party daily, and it's from Black populations, Hispanic populations, Asian populations, and the entire working class, which is not resonating with the progressive platform, which I mostly support. It's failing. So, here in Seattle, when I've asked the Democratic folks if they're listening or paying attention, they shrug me off. What are you doing, and what are your pals doing so that we don't lose the elections ahead?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I don't believe that it's progressives who are losing the elections. I really don't. And I'm willing to have this conversation with anybody that wants to have it. If we had passed a $15 minimum wage 10 years ago at the federal level, if we had invested in collective bargaining and passed some version of the PRO Act 10 years ago when Democrats had control, if we had, I mean, look, the ACA has been excellent compared to what we had before, but imagine if we had passed universal health care 10 years ago, this would be a different situation. But what we have done, and look, I'm talking about Democrats also, what we have done is forgotten about populist ideas that help working people. Union organizing, raising the minimum wage, providing health care to people, these are things that really matter. And so when people say to me, progressives are losing the debate, I'm sorry, but there are states that went for Donald Trump in the last election and passed a $15 minimum wage.
Yes.
And yet it took us until just a couple of years ago for all the Democrats to get on board around a higher minimum wage. So I feel like progressives get blamed for a lot of things, but there are populist ideas that really resonate, that are the core of the progressive platform, that are incredibly popular. But we don't do it because there's a lot of money in politics. Guess how many private insurance and pharmaceutical drug lobbyists there are for every member of Congress?
100.
He says 4, and
I said
somebody over here
100.
says 100. 200.
Oh my God.
200.
Every member?
The amount of money that is in politics today is stunning. Stunning. And that's the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. So I feel that what we need to do is just talk to people about how to make their lives better. And calling people deplorables was not helpful. The reality is, I don't think Hillary Clinton would have said she was a progressive. So there's lots of blame to go around. I'm not trying to put the blame on anybody, but I do get tired of people saying it's progressives that are losing us elections, when what we know is that our ideas are incredibly popular. Not all of them, not all of them. But movements for justice that come from the streets are incredibly important, even when they're not popular.
The Poor People's Campaign.
What's that?
The Poor People's Campaign.
The Poor People's Campaign is a perfect example, Reverend William Barber. I mean, these are the things that we have to pay attention to. And I don't think that we're gonna lose. I really don't. Republicans lose elections and then insist they've won. Democrats win elections, and before we've even run, they're saying we've lost. So I have enormous hope. I hope I can eventually convince you to have enormous hope in being able to bring our country forward. And we are at the end of our time here, and I don't want to end on a negative note. So here's what I want to say to you. There is nothing in the history of this country or this world that has ever been done that was hard, that was done quickly.
Yes.
There were people who fought and gave their lives for things that were hard, that people said were not possible. For the right to vote, for the right to be free, for the right to have a democracy. So many things with barriers placed in their way over and over again. And at the end of the day, they never gave up. They never gave up. They kept fighting, and when somebody said something wasn't possible, they said, watch me. I'm gonna keep working at it. And that, I hope, is what we can do if we come together. And we don't have to agree on everything. I mean, I'm married. I don't agree with my husband on 100% of things. We don't have to agree on everything. But what we do need to agree on is that we will never give up. And I am so grateful to serve as your representative in Congress. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight.